Bore da i chi gyd, a diolch yn fawr iawn i chi am ymuno gyda ni ar gyfer ein gwebinar heddi i baratoi i ddarparu'r Cymhwyster Dilyniant mewn gwaith coed ar y safle, gwaith coed Pensaernïol a gosod fframiau Pren. Good morning to you all, and thank you very much for joining us for a webinar on how to prepare to deliver the progression qualification in site carpentry, architectural joinery and timber frame erection. Rydym yn gweithio adre, felly ymddeiriadau ymlaen llaw am unrhyw sŵn yn y cefndir ac unrhyw oedi yn y sleidiau. We are all working from home, therefore I apologise in advance for any background noise and any delay in the slides. Dyma'r pedwerydd webinar ar y meysydd masnach unigol ar gyfer y Cymhwyster Dilyniant. Gallwch gofrestru ar weddill y gwebinarau yma ar wefan Sgiliau i Gymru. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi gyd am unodd ym y gwebinarau ar gyfer y sylfaen. Mae bob recordiad ar wefan Sgiliau i Gymru. This is the fourth in a series of webinars on the individual trade-specific areas for the progression qualifications. The links to register on all the remaining webinars can be found on the Skills for Wales website. Thank you to you all who joined the Foundation webinars. All recordings can be found on the Skills for Wales website. Fe fyddwch yn derbyn e-bost cyn diwedd y webinar gyda linc i'n harolwg a'r pwynt pŵer yma yn y Gymraeg a'r Saesneg. Byddem ddiolchgar iawn petai chi'n cymeryd yr amser i lenwi ein harolwg gan bod eich adborth yn ferthfawr iawn i ni. You will receive an email before the session ends with a link to a survey and also the PowerPoints in English and Welsh. We would be very grateful if you could take the time to fill in this survey as your feedback is very valuable to us. Dyma beth fyddwn ni'n mynd trwyddo bore yma. Fe fyddwn yn esbonio pam mae gennym ni'r gymwysterau newydd yma ac yna yn edrych ar gynnwys y Cymhwyster Dilyniant gan edrych yn benodol ar gwaith coed ar y safle, gwaith coed Pensaernïol a gosod fframiau Pren. Fe fyddwn yn edrych ar strwythur yr unedau ac yn rhoi amlinelliad o'r asesiadau. Yna fe fyddwn yn edrych ar yr adnoddau y fydd ar gael i chi cyn symud ymlaen at y camau nesaf. Yna edrych ar y taith i gymeradwyo ar gyfer eich canolfan ac yna edrych ar y trefniadau trosiannol sydd yn lle i chi. I gloi, fe fyddwn yn rhoi y cyfle i chi ofyn unrhyw gwestiynau. Plis rhowch eich cwestiynau yn y tab cwestiynau sydd ar y llaw dde o'ch sgrin. This is what we'll be discussing this morning. We will be briefly going over the transformation of these new qualifications. We will look at the progression qualification content, looking specifically on site carpentry, architectural joinery and timber frame erection. We will look at the structure of the units and outline of the assessments. We will then have a look at the resources available for you before moving on to the next steps. We will then go over the transition arrangements that are in place for you. And then you'll have an opportunity for you to ask us any questions. Please type in any questions that you have throughout this webinar in the questions tab on the right-hand side of your screen. Fe fydd y cyflwyniad yn para tua awr gyda hanner awr i ateb unrhyw gwestiynau. The presentation will last around an hour with 30 minutes for questions. Felly dyma i chi eich cyflwynwyr heddi. Here are your presenters today. We have David Pye, who is the Technical Advisor for Building Services at City and Guilds. And we have Ian Roberts, who's the Technical Advisor for Construction at City and Guilds. And myself, Angharad Lloyd-Bainan, and I'm the Business Development Manager for City and Guilds for Wales. Nawr, fe gen I Paul sydyn i wybod am eich dealltwriaeth chi am y cymwysterau newydd yma. Now, we will have a quick poll to get your understanding of these new qualifications. Therefore, if you could put in your answer with 5 being the highest, therefore, what is the level of your current understanding of the progression qualification? Felly beth yw lefel eich dealltwriaeth chi o'r gymhwyster dilyniant yma gyda 5 rhif uchaf? Just give you a few more seconds to give you a chance to answer. Ni just rhoi chydig goleuadau i chi. Grêt, diolch yn fawr iawn i chi. Thank you very much to you. Diddorol iawn, a gobeithio byddwch yn deall fwy am y cymhwyster yma ar ôl y gwem yna. Thank you very much to you, and I'm sure you'll have a greater understanding of the progression qualification after this webinar. We will now have a quick look at the reason why these new qualifications have come about. We will look at the transformation, which I'm sure you all already know the reasons why. So in February 2018, Qualifications Wales published the Building the Future report. It was a sector review of qualifications and the qualification system in the construction and the built environment in Wales. The report summarised the views of learning providers and a range of professional and representative bodies, together with more than 100 and over 900 learners. It included findings from their own review of a sample of qualifications and an international comparison study. Qualifications Wales' outlined findings were that there were inconsistent assessment practice. An assessment is often not well managed and quality assurance can be inconsistent, and some areas of learnings are not effectively assessed. There was a need for learners to be able to deal with a range of tasks and to be able to problem solve, which we have incorporated into the new qualifications with aspects such as planning and evaluation skills. And there was a need that qualifications needed to meet the skills needs of Wales, such as heritage buildings, traditional materials, tools and techniques, and how they have changed over time, together with new and emerging technologies in trades. The content and design of current qualifications means that learners can miss out on skills and techniques that they need to meet the needs of employers across Wales. Qualifications do not always meet the needs of employers or the economy, and some are considered to be outdated, irrelevant, or inadequate. They found that the need to rationalise the amount of the 400 plus technical and vocational qualifications in the construction and built environment sector, and a need for having coherence in these qualifications. And the key to keep portability between the nations. So the consortium of EAL and City and Guilds have been working with sector bodies to facilitate this and using recognised standards for each trade. Therefore, in doing this, we have engaged with a lot of stakeholders. So the content has been developed in conjunction with a number of stakeholders, such as technical consultants from across Wales, technical working groups and forums, such as stakeholder forums and BACH, current practitioners across Wales, industry including micro, small, medium and large contractors across the sectors, and all this with the agreement of QW. On this slide, it's just a little overview of the questions that you may have regarding the progression qualification. As I mentioned earlier, this will be included in the email that has been sent out to you. So it's just as a reference only for you. On this slide, it shows you the progression qualification and the options available to the learners. So for option A, they would complete the progression qualification in 1 year in full-time learning before securing an apprenticeship. Option B would be to complete 2 years in full-time learning before securing an apprenticeship. And option C would be direct onto an apprenticeship, and the apprenticeship will be available from 2022. The foundation qualification is the entry point for learners who wish to start their journey towards occupational competence in a construction or building services engineering trade. And the progression qualification has been designed as an optional second year for learners to do after the foundation. It is particularly useful as a meaningful programme of study in full-time education if a learner has not secured an apprenticeship place. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi. Hoffwn nawr eich trosglwyddo i David Pye a fydd yn eich tywysg trwy y sleidiau nesaf. I would now like to pass you over to David Pye, who will take you through the next slides. Diolch, David. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne Harrod, and welcome everyone. We're going to have a look at the content. So we'd like to introduce you to the joint branded document relating to the progression qualification. The qualification handbook is a starting point and contains information on staffing, resources, summary of assessment and qualification content. You will also have an assessment pack and a project pack, which gives in-depth information on the assessment requirements, such as centres practicals, resource lists, how to conduct centre assessments. They will also be available in the Welsh language and will be available shortly on the consortium website. Next slide, please, Ian. So let's consider the importance of combination. There are 3 core units, which are Unit 201, the employment and employability in the construction sector. This unit will cover trade relevant bodies and organisations within construction sector, the main principles of self-employment, the importance of personal skills, problem solving within their scope of responsibility. Then we have Unit 202. The title of this unit is Changing Practices Over Time. And this unit will cover the changing construction and built environment sector, changes in construction materials, in the tools, changes in techniques over time, the relationship between trade and the environment, and the connected practice in construction and building services engineering. And then the final core unit is planning and evaluating work in the construction sector in Wales. And this unit covers how to calculate costs, determine resource requirements, planning work, and the importance of evaluation of the work. Then there are trade-specific units, which we can see on the following slide. So as you see this slide, you can see the 3 core units which we have discussed. And for Pathway B, architectural joinery, you have the additional units 207 to 211. So architectural joinery and knowledge, setting out, marking out, setting details, routine products, manufacture, and setting up and using transportable cutting and shave machines. So you can see the content and the units that, or you have an idea of the content from the unit titles within Pathway B. Slide, please, Ian. Pathway C is site carpentry. So again, you see the same core units, but then we have different units, 212 through to 217. Starting with carpentry knowledge, first fixing, second fixing, erecting structural casings, masons, and again setting up and transportable cutting and shaping machines. As we go on to the next slide, we can see Pathway D, timber frame erection, and again the 3 core units, and then 218, 19, 20. So timber frame erection knowledge, erect timber walls and floors, and erect timber roof structures. Thank you, Ian. As mentioned earlier, the GLH total is 540, and this is the time the average learner is anticipated to study and be assessed under supervision. This is broken down to 100 hours for the pathway, 378 for the core, 378 for the pathway, 100 for the core, and 62 for assessment. Total qualification time also is the time a learner will spend on their own study, such as revision. So the qualification has 600 hours of total qualification time, which is 60 credits. So now I'd like to pass you on to my colleague Ian to take you through the next section. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, David and Harrod, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Before I begin, I'd just like to make a special welcome for our guest who's joined us from New Zealand. So we do hope you find this useful. So now let's take a look into the units. As we can see here, there is always a temptation to look at assessments and work backwards to the delivery. But if we consider the handbook and the details in the units, we will get a full outlook of the content to be delivered. Just a reminder that the learning outcome is the overview. The assessment criteria start to detail what outcome is expected for successful assessment, and the range indicates the breadth of knowledge and skills to be covered. Of course, what we have to remember is that all elements of the range must be covered in the delivery. The unit we have highlighted here is Unit 202, and David's already gone through briefly with it, and this is changing practices over time. But what you'll find in the handbook is at the top of the page will show the unit number and the title. The guided learning hours, which is 45, it then goes on to describe a brief overview of the unit. In this instance, it is for learners to gain knowledge and understanding of how materials, tools and techniques have changed and adapted from 1919, as well as looking to the future. This is something tutors delivering the content may have to carry out additional research or CPD to update their knowledge and understanding. But this is no different to what we have had to carry out previously when we've had to teach new content. Immediately below, you will then see the learning outcomes, and in this instance, it's learning outcome 1. The one key difference compared to current qualifications is that we tend not to use active verbs, such as state, explain, and describe in the criteria. This was to enable the content to be assessed in various different ways. But the depth of content section, as shown in the blue box when we turn over leaf, gives you a good description as to what the depth and content needs to be taught. So following on, we can see the learning outcome discussed on an earlier slide, which is for Unit 202. It's know the changes in the construction methods over time. When we look at criteria 2.1, we can see the heading pre-1919 construction methods, and the range is immediately beneath. When we then build up to 2.3, which is the 21st century construction techniques and technologies, we could then ask, what does this cover? And this is where we consider the range, off-site manufacturing, prefabricated construction components, 3D printing of construction components, etc. Then we can ask what depth. And in the depth in the lower blue box describes further the expected outcomes. So let's have a closer look at 2.3, which states learners will know emerging methods of construction for 21st century buildings. This should include the materials and tools, techniques relevant to their chosen trade, etc. And the depth of content is there to provide you with the information you will require to the depth of coverage that is required. As we are covering 3 pathways, I'm now going to help reinforce the message from the previous slide and to show how construction is considered in the architectural joinery pathway. And we will take a quick look at Unit 208, which is produced setting out details for routine products. And at the bottom of the slide, there is outcome 1, which again has the same layout and structure as we've previously seen. Again, we can see the same layout following on from the previous slide, and we can see the learning outcome 1, characteristics of resources from unit 208. And that is a unit from the architectural joinery, and the depth of content that has to be covered. In other words, learning outcome 1, learners will know the characteristics and suitability of resources when selecting them for setting out details for routine products. We can then see the range in the products that have to be covered. Here we can see the same layout as previous slides, and this time we are covering site carpentry pathway. And we will take a quick look at Unit 214, which is install second fixing components. And at the bottom of the slide, there is outcome 3, which is comply with the given contract information to carry out the work safely and efficiently to the required specifications. And then we can see on the next slide, the depth that also has to be covered. And what you will already have seen or noticed is that learning outcome 1, 2 and 3 have got the same titles, whichever pathway you're going to be covering. It's then contextualized to each one. So again, we can see the previous slides. At this time, we're covering, like we've mentioned, site carpentry pathway, and we're looking at the Unit 214. You can see the same layout covering learning outcome 3 that contains 2 criteria. In criteria 3.2, we select, use and maintain and power tools to install at least 5 of the following to given working instructions. Then below in the blue box, you can see the depth that has to be covered. The third and final pathway we are covering within the wood trades is timber frame erection. And here I have highlighted Unit 220, erect timber roof structures. And at the bottom of the slide, you can see the third learning outcomes. The learning outcome titles, as I've mentioned previously, are the same for each pathway, and criteria is contextualized, like we've mentioned, to each pathway moving forward. Without going into too much detail, here once again we have the learning outcome that contains 2 criteria, and 3.1 demonstrates the work skills to measure, mark out, fit, align, finish, position and secure. And then below in the box you can see the depth that has to be covered. And learning outcome 3.2 is use and maintain hand power tools, portable power tools, ancillary equipment to construct, erect or install the following roof structures. And then once again you can see in the blue box the depth that has to be covered, which means that they can select safely, set up, etc. And it is worth noting at this point that the criteria and range to cover is extracted from the occupational competency statements set by industry, and it's also to enable a smooth transition when the learner is successful in gaining employment. Moving on, I would now like to take a closer look at the assessment. Just like the foundation, the progression qualification is assessed using 3 assessment methods. The on-screen assessment, which is externally set and externally marked, and has an overall weighting of 20%. Whereas the practical project, now covering just the one trade pathway, is externally set, internally marked, but now has a weighting of 60%. The third one, the guided discussion, is externally set and internally marked with a weighting of 20%. And as many learners prefer hands-on experience, this weighting of assessment will identify and reward demonstrated skills within the practical project. We will be going through each method of assessment in the up and coming slides. But before we do move on, I would like to reinforce we have an assessment pack detailing the requirements of the assessments, which will be able to be downloaded from the Skills for Wales website in the next coming weeks. And this is the same for each pathway, whether it's timber frame direction, site carpentry or architectural joinery. The on-screen assessments covering the 3 core units is 70 minutes long and contains 45 questions. And it is recommended that this is taken prior to the practical and guided discussion. Regarding the practical project pathway, is made up of 3 tasks, and we'll be going through an example of the 3 tasks for each pathway very soon, that require the learner to plan, perform and evaluate. This has to be taken before the guided discussion. The guided discussion again is within each pathway, and this contains 2 parts, including the learner's reflection on the practical project. The method of assessment is externally set, internally marked and externally verified. And the guided discussion can only take place once the learner has completed the practical project. Excuse me. The health and safety assessment is not part of the qualification, and I have to reinforce it is not mandatory. It is, however, to allow the learner to move forward in readiness to carry out the CSCS health and safety test to gain the CSCS competency card and can be taken at any stage of the assessment process. This may have already been taken while working towards their foundation qualification. But it's worth reminding ourselves that the content within the qualification covers all aspects of the learning required, which means there is no additional learning required. Here we can see examples of a selection of questions from the on-screen test, and these are from the various wood trades. Some are straight multiple choice, some are drag and drop, and others are pictures asking the learner to identify. This will be similar to what we do currently on many assessments, with the additional variety of question types that will now be seen. Like we've mentioned, the test can be taken at any stage within the assessment process, although it is recommended that it is completed prior to the practical project and guided discussion taking place. The practical project, now this is a new approach to assessment, but it uses many similar approaches we have used in different and previous assessments, particularly when we consider design type assessments and practicals with supporting evidence such as materials lists. Whilst it's a new title, the approach will be familiar. The project is externally set, internally marked and externally quality assured. The project, as previously mentioned, has 3 elements. The first element is planning, then the second performing, and the third is evaluating. The learner will have 14 hours allocated for the planning of all the 3 tasks. There'll be 40 hours allocated to carry out the performing of the 3 tasks, and then finally 6 hours to be able to evaluate all the 3 tasks within the project. What is worth noting is the learner will not be able to use the time they have been given for each element for another part of that element. So in other words, for example, if they complete the planning in 12 hours, they may not use the other 2 hours for either the performing or the evaluating elements. The learner will be required to devise plans for all three tasks, showing the approach they will take to undertake the work required in the tasks, underpinned by an overall schedule of works. Once the task has been completed, they will be required to evaluate their work, and they must adhere to all relevant health and safety rules and procedures at all times. The planning task will be undertaken in a classroom environment where they will have access to IT equipment and appropriate resources to carry out their research. These materials may include guidance notes, regulations, and manufacturer's instructions or literature. Questions they may have to ask themselves, for example, is what does a good build installation look like in my trade area? And how can I achieve this? Requirements for the performing element can be found in section 3 of the Practical Project Guide, which contains project briefs for each trade. And once again, if the learner completes in less time, they cannot use the extra time for the other elements of this project or take time from other elements to add time here. Once learners have completed the performing elements of the project, they must produce one evaluation report which reflects on the whole project and includes all tasks. This will be undertaken in a classroom environment under supervision from centre staff, ensuring learners have access to their planning documentation to support their review and evaluation activity. With regards to marking of the planning, performing and evaluation, there is a marking grid located within the assessment pack to be used for each element. But we will be taking a deeper dive into the marking grid in future dedicated sessions, so please look out for future webinars and possibly face-to-face sessions should restrictions reduce in future. The next 3 slides, I'm going to take you through an example of a project for each of the 3 pathways. Before I begin, I would like to state that we have taken on board concerns that have been raised regarding the height of the tasks, and the measurements have been amended to read a minimum of 2.2 meters to save the cost of materials and ensure working safely within the college environment. Here I would like to start with the architectural joinery. And here we can see an example of the practical project that provides an assessment brief. And this is to try and make the assessment as realistic as we possibly can and prepare the learner. Whichever pathway a learner is working towards, the assessment is made up of 3 tasks. And in this instance, we've got task A, is produce a stair string, newel and handrail. Task B, produce panelled balustrade. And then task C is produce a bin store framed ledge door. Hours will be allocated to each task as a guide for a learner that will total the 40 hours. Each task has a set measurement that the learner will have to work towards. These sample assessments are available from the Skills for Wales website in the next couple of weeks. So please, when you get the opportunity, take a look and then let me pause just for a moment for you to briefly look at these tasks before we move on to the site carpentry. Now we can see an example of a project for site carpentry. Once again, you will see an assessment brief to try and make the assessment as realistic as we possibly can and prepare the learner. Although I haven't shown you all the drawings for the tasks, you can get a flavour for the tasks that's got to be completed. Task 1A is construct and fix the storm porch to the existing garden office. Task 1B is erect a truss roof with a projecting verge. The gable is to be shiplap-clad, and this can be done on a centre supplied jig. Task 2 is clad internal face of the front wall, fix the door frame and hang door including relevant ironmongery, and fix decorative mouldings and carry out remedial work. And finally, the task 3 is install a corner setup of base and wall units with worktops in the existing office. And like I've mentioned, the height will be a minimum of 2.2 meters, and this is to allow for the safety of the learner working at height and also keeping the resource down to a minimum requirement and cost. Now we can see an example of a project for a timber frame direction. And again, you'll have an assessment brief to try and make the assessment as realistic as we possibly can. And once again, it is to prepare the learner. The assessment is made up of 3 tasks. And here we can see task 1A. Task 1, is fix sole plates, fabricate and erect timber frame panels, apply an external moisture barrier. Task 2 is fabricate and install a cassette flooring system incorporating a trimmed opening. And task 3 is erect a truss roof with spandrel panels, gable ladders, fascia, soffit and barge boards to move forward. Again, I'll just pause a moment so you can look at the activity. Whichever pathway the learner is working towards, which refers to the 3 tasks, the learner would have to complete what you can see on the left of the screen, the materials list, tools and equipment that will be required. There will be an overview materials list for the centre to help plan and prepare. But this, along with the tools and equipment list, is not to be shared with the learner, as they will make their own as part of their planning activity you can see at this moment. The right-hand side of the slide shows the marking grid. This grid helps us to grade the learner, as we'll use the tolerances to apply marks, such as a door square within plus or a minus 2 millimeters to gain marks between 1 to 3. This is an approach using some previous qualifications, such as the 6706, so should be familiar to tutors, but if not, it's a fairly straightforward method and is similar to the approach on Wales skills competitions. The guided discussion is in 2 parts, completed in one timed, internally marked and externally verified, and carried out in 40 minutes. An extra 5 minutes can be allocated to complete their final question. This will explore the learner's knowledge within their chosen pathway. It will also explore their knowledge and understanding of self-employed in their chosen pathway. And it is recommended that a gap of no more than 3 weeks is left between the learner's finalization of their project and completion of the guided discussion. Moving forward, we will take a deeper dive into the guided discussion as an assessment method in future dedicated sessions. So once again, please look out for future webinars and possibly face-to-face sessions should restrictions reduce to be able to allow it in future. To complete this section of the presentation, here is an overview of the assessments we have briefly covered for the progression qualification. Learners will receive provisional grades for the assessments within 1 week of completion. Qualifications will undergo internal and external quality assurance, and the final grading will be issued by City and Guilds. It is worth noting the slight change in procedure to current qualifications. and this is to enable us to quality assure and calculate the grading based on results across all 3 assessments. If a learner fails to successfully achieve a pass grade in any of the 3 assessments, then they are permitted to resit or resubmit, and there are no limits to reassessments. However, time may become an issue, as learners will require further training and reinforcement prior to further attempts. I would now like to pass you back to David, who will take you through the next items on the agenda. Thank you for now.
Thank you very much, Ian. We'll now have a look at the resources. You may have seen some of this supporting information in previous webinars, but I'll quickly cover some of this again as a recap and for those who may have not seen it before. Firstly, to help with initial setup, our resource document gives an overview requirements to deliver and to offer the qualifications. Please access this document in your planning meetings to help answer those questions on resources and staffing. We also have a prospectus, which will help centres create their own promotional literature and help provide information for learners, parents and employers. So please access those documents on the Skills for Wales website. On the following slide, we can see an exemplar of our adaptable delivery planner. We do have a blank version, and it's likely that each centre will consider delivery quite differently, such as the duration you run each unit and when you build in your practicals, for example. The planner has a row for you to input your units and then the weeks to tick off as you work through the content of each unit. The next slide, please, Ian. To support your CPD, we will be releasing a quarterly newsletter with links to various opportunities to engage with learning experiences. These may be links to dedicated videos or possibly new manufacturers, news or instructions and guidance and so on. The next slide, please, Ian. We're also creating a resource section on the Skills for Wales website to collect learning resources from third parties such as providers and centres. We'll hopefully be trying to link up relevant courses from trade and industry bodies such as CITB, the CIPHE, NFB, various e-learning packages. Thank you. This slide shows some of the dates you can expect to see the materials become available. The new resources and CPD resources in May 21. Delivery and assessment guidance from September 21, and employer and CPD materials any moment now. Next slide, please, Ian. We have a completely new suite of tutor resources, as you can see on this slide. These have been offered for review and include typically support materials such as presentations and question papers, things you'll be familiar with current support packages. Next slide, please, Ian. We have a dedicated foundation book created by Hodder Education to support delivery and learning across the 6 core units in the foundation qualification. There is a sample chapter that can be accessed through the link on this slide. But in addition to this, as we can see on this slide, Hodder are creating 3 mapping documents into their current trade-specific textbooks. So these can be used with the new suite of qualifications. So if you have those current textbooks already, access the mapping document from Hodder, you can continue to use those for further learning. So now let's move on to our next steps. On the following slide, we can see several key dates. A couple I'll try and highlight are the overview of teaching and learning webinars planned for May this year, with some follow-up sessions, hopefully face-to-face, to follow in the next academic year. And the go live for first teaching is September 2021, so it's not too far away now. Let's move on to some of the transition requirements. These have been discussed before, and Qualification Wales have run webinars on these which are available to view, but let's have a brief recap. A learner completing a broad level 1 qualification this year, it's suggested, could progress onto the foundation. Someone completing a trade-specific level 1 may progress onto the foundation or progression, but this will depend on the suitability of the learner to go on to the progression at that stage. A learner completing level 2 trade-specific this year may progress to the progression or level 3 trade-specific. There are other options which suggest you consider this diagram and considering when you're considering the suitable destinations for learners. But let's have a look at how this will look in future. This next slide looks a bit more straightforward because we're moving into offering the new qualifications from 2022. So this slide shows a journey for all those learners starting in 22, showing the broad level 1 and a foundation of suitable starting points and the new apprenticeship for learners who are employed. So from next year, the landscape will be much more straightforward as we move completely to the new qualifications. The following slide shows all the links to our future webinars. So please take a look at the selection of webinars and register for the ones which are suitable. We always advise, even if you're not sure if you can make it live, that you register for the webinar anyway, because then you will get a link to the recording. It saves you having to search and find it. So always try and register anyway. So as we move on to the final slide, I believe it is, the next one coming up, it's just to say thank you very much for listening to the main presentation. Thank you very much to Ian for putting that together and hosting the main part of that presentation, and Harrod for opening up. What we'd like to do now is probably just pause for a few moments to give you a chance to reflect and have a consider and a think about which questions you might want to ask. There may not be questions, there may just be topics that you want us maybe to cover again. You'd like myself or Ian to go through again or describe, or just sharing some of your current thoughts, maybe some barriers, some positives, you know, good and bad. Let's have a look and a discussion around all of those thoughts, and because we all get to benefit from those discussions. So I was just looking at the questions now. There were a couple before which I tried to type responses to. I'll just try and answer those again verbally before I pass the next one on to yourself, Ian. So if a learner starts a progression course, are the units from the foundation course they must complete? Well, as part of the apprenticeship, learners must do a core, and the core mirrors the foundation course, with the exception that they only choose one pathway, not two. So if a learner hasn't done the foundation as part of their journey, and then they get an apprenticeship, they will have to make sure they cover those the core qualification. So that's why it's seen as the most suitable starting point as a foundation for learners, because it's part of that whole learner journey. But moving on to the next question, Ian. When will the qualification handbook and assessment documents be added to the Skills for Wales website?
Yeah, thank you, David. And a good question, to be honest. But just to give you a brief update, what we've done on the 25th of March, we made our 4th submission for the progression qualification. We received feedback last Friday, and we're just working through now the final little amendments that's required. And it's not amendments to the content or the projects or anything like that. It's just some of the wording in the qualification handbook. And you can well imagine, once you come out with a new suite of qualifications, the amount of documents and handbooks and things like that that's got to be produced is quite extraordinary, to be honest, and rightly so. So what we're doing is we should have confirmation by this Friday, and then before we're allowed to put them on the website, they've got to be in the Welsh language as well as in English as well. So that gives people the opportunity to either choose between one or the other one, either English or Welsh. The documentation, and we can't just put it up in little qualification handbook and then some other quality issues. It's all got to go together. So week commencing the Monday the 10th of May, we're envisaging an open that everything regarding the progression qualification, like it was with the foundation, will be uploaded the week commencing the 10th of May. And that will be the qualification handbook that David's mentioned, plus also the assessments, practical projects and examples of questions will be uploaded at the same time, along with other documents as well. As you can imagine, I think we've got something like 300,000 words to get translated. And so hopefully it'll all be there, done and ready for the week commencing the 10th of May. Right? So please, and we will be sending an email alert out to everybody that signed up for the Skills for Wales website to make sure you all get notification they're there. And that's when they'll be ready. Okay, thank you for your question.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Ian, for that response. I've got another question in, which I think I know the answer for, but I'll put it again to you, Ian, as you're a little bit closer to that part of it than myself. When will with the multiple choice end tests, will there be just one version of the test or multiple versions available for resits?
It's a good question, and it's from our colleague in New Zealand, so it's really good that he's still active and he's still listening, David. Yes, there'll be more than one version to cover the full assessment criteria, and they will be obviously available for the resits as well. So there'll be more than one version. Exactly how many versions at the moment? We've had to submit to Qualifications Wales to make sure they are comfortable in the type of questions, and also that it meets the relevant assessment criteria as well as, and it's got the right wording attached to them. But we've also got to make sure as well that they're in the Welsh languages as well as. So there'll be, at the moment, there's 2 versions, but I've no doubt there'll be up to 3 versions moving forward. In fact, some trade areas will have 3 versions, but the majority will only have 2 versions to make sure we can cover the full range of assessment criteria that we have to meet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. Questions have dried up just for now, so please do have a think about any further queries that you may have. What I think we'll do, Ian, is there's just a couple more slides to finish off with. If we can just go through those whilst people think if they've got any further questions. We won't delay the webinar any longer than we need to. If there are no questions, we can close a little bit early, that's fine. But if we just cover the last couple of slides whilst people are thinking.
Yeah, just as a reminder for people, David, if there's no question, they just want to discuss anything and they'd like to talk, then we're more than happy to open up so that they've got a voice on here. We don't just have to answer the questions for them, do they? They can ask them themselves if they wish. For other delegates.
That's correct. Yeah, if they're happy to chat on the webinar and they want to just share some thoughts, just drop us a chat or a question and make a note of that, and we can unmute you too, so you can share those with us as well. So yeah, we can definitely do that if that helps. So whilst we're waiting, so just the last couple of slides really, your feedback, it's so important. I know we ask for it quite a lot in our various organisations, but when we're developing material, it's so important to gather feedback on the material, on the approaches, on our support for you as providers. We want to make sure that we're on this journey together. We're here to help. We're working, this progression of development has been done very much in line with webinars, continually keeping you up to date, and that's why part of this development is still ongoing whilst we're doing the webinars, because we're trying to get feedback during the full development of the qualifications. So rather than create them and then bring them to you, you're along this journey with us. So we're very conscious that the thing that makes that more valuable for yourselves and for us is that feedback. So yeah, just a big call out really to say thanks for attending this, but also please do share your feedback following this webinar. And on the final slide, it gives us an email address that we keep promoting. So it's skillsforwales.customer@sittingills.com email address. Ian and myself are all too happy to try and answer queries for you. That's not a problem. But any big questions or queries or feedback, it can be good to put it on that email address. It's logged centrally. It will be shared with myself and Ian if we're best placed to answer that. So it will come to us, or you can copy us in to those. But it's a good way of logging that query centrally. So please make a note of that actual email address. So now what we'll do is we'll just double back onto the questions, just give everyone a few final moments. Please do type your questions in now. We'll finish in the next couple of minutes if there's no further thoughts or questions. It's not your final chance to ask questions. If you think of some after today, you can always email us or log into the future webinars that are coming up.
What I would like to say, David, is really appreciate people attendance today, especially how busy they are. We understand that, but also a special thank you for our colleague joining in New Zealand to give us the time, especially when the number of hours he is behind, just so we can keep his hand in and can keep an eye on and making sure we are developing.
What time it is in New Zealand? What time would it be? Is it middle of the night?
I'm hoping he's just going to let us know, David, but you never know. But,
Tap into the chat.
Some colleagues.
10 p.m. Okay.
No, that's great. But just to let colleagues know, the gentleman that's on, some of you may have already met anyway. The gentleman called Stuart Martin, who was a part of the development early days before he decided to emigrate and go back home to New Zealand. All right, so it's Stuart Martin that's actually on. So really appreciate it, Stuart, for joining, like all the rest of the delegates. But thank you. And we hope we haven't let you down, Stuart.
Yeah, I've just put that it feels like a long day already, so it already feels like 10 p.m. here as well, if that makes you feel any better, Stuart.
It's good to hear from you, mate, anyway, and same for you colleagues as well. Thank you for joining, and we hope you've enjoyed it and you've got something out, which is crucial.
Yeah, I think the questions have dried up, but we will have further opportunities to ask questions in future, so please do stay in touch. So yeah, what we'll do now then is we'll formally bring this presentation and webinar to a close. So final thank you very much to everyone who's attended. I know it's very busy and stressful at your centres at this moment in time, so we're conscious of that, so thank you. Big thank you to Ian for creating the presentation and delivering the main part of it, and Harrod for opening up. So please enjoy the rest of your day, stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. Bye.